we come to the first of the 4 items that are in front of us today, which is the adoption of the annual budget. Just to foreshadow what we're doing today, we have 4 papers which effectively formally confirm the decisions that were made by Finance and Performance and Governing Body on the 7th of June. The only changes in the papers today from the decisions that we made collectively on the 7th of June are 2, and they were both omissions that were made in error. The first is to include solid waste services activity, which was left out of the groups of activity tables, and that's dealt with under item 9. And the second is to correct the omission of the postponement of rates for those impacted by any future COVID-19 event, which will be covered in item 11. Otherwise, the items in front of us are the same as the items that we have discussed and voted on the 7th of June. And of course, what we're doing today is simply the formal approval of those decisions that we are required to do under the Local Government Act by the 1st of July, which is this Friday. And if we don't do that, then we will lack supply for council, and council will considerably slow down, if not stop. So no pressure, anyone. Overall, we've had 63 hours of debate and discussion in workshops and in committee on the budget. So we've gone past the stage of discussing and debating, and really what that leaves us to do today is simply the formal process of confirming those decisions. So the first item is item number 8, the adoption of the annual budget. As I mentioned before, the Local Government Act 2002 requires us to adopt this budget prior to the 1st of July, and it confirms, the officials have confirmed that the budget as passed on the 7th of July is compliant with legal requirements. The motion is simply to require us to adopt the budget and then to delegate authority for any minor editorial changes to the Chair of Finance and Performance and the Chief Financial Officer. So I'll go through the normal routine of asking if there are any questions. Are there any comments? There being no comments or questions, I will put the motion.
Question? Got a question?
Sorry, and before I take the question from Councillor Walker, I will move and I will ask Councillor Simpson to second that if she's in agreement.
Yes, Your Worship, except I'm on B. You might want Bill to do it if I'm mentioned to B. I'm happy either way though.
No, I don't think there's any conflict there. So you're happy for you to second it. And I have a question from Councillor Walker, I think it is.
Yes, so I've got a question on the budget. My understanding that this budget includes the budget for the Te Puna Monga Authority. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes, that's included in the overall budget.
Okay. I have a question further to that, and that is whether there is any expenditure proposed for the removal of trees.
We don't have anybody from the Te Puna Monga Authority here because we have, I think that question was raised and dealt with at an earlier meeting, Councillor. Tamsin, have you got anything that you can add to that?
Yes, for you, Mayor Goff. Yes, the Mayor's correct that this was discussed at your joint hui when you adopted the operational plan, and a summary of the operational plan is included in the budget documentation, and that includes a high-level summary of expenditure across the 10 years as per the long-term plan.
Yeah, as you'll be aware, Councillor, we have had the opportunity, we have discussed this, there was the opportunity, full opportunity for questions, and questions were asked. This is now simply the confirmation process.
Sure. I did try to ask a question on the previous occasion, but I wasn't able to. In the intervening period, the judgment around the consultation provisions is now out, and the Tupuna Manga Authority were unsuccessful in being able to take leave to appeal. Without having the answer, I do know that there is a sum of money for tree planting and removal. So I wish to speak to this at a later point, if that's possible. The other question that I've got just goes to the waste charges. I have indicated earlier my opposition to the removal of pay-as-you-throw and a number of other parts of the waste budget. Is there any opportunity for a councillor to vote against a particular part of the budget if we're so minded?
Tamsin, would you like to address that question? We go through in item number 10 specific charges. I'm just trying to recall whether waste was, it's more to deal with the actual rates struck, but whether we have waste under that. Yes, it's under subclause 6. So your opportunity, councillor, to vote on that would be under item 10A6.
Okay. The other question I have just goes to the accommodation provider targeted rate. Is there any mechanism where I can record my vote against that rate? I understand, I think that it's being deferred, but if there is any opportunity for me to vote against it, perhaps if you could show me where.
There is no accommodation provider targeted rate set pending a decision by the Supreme Court. We can't comment on the rate because that decision is pending, but no rate is set in this budget. Okay, next question is Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. Mine follows on actually from the question posed by Councillor Walker, and that is we have new information at this meeting on the basis of the decision of the Supreme Court not to allow the appeal. So my question relates to what provision had been made in terms of operational funds, because that was planned from the Tupuna Manga Authority, and I have no idea, but whether there would have been significant sums or minor sums that were set aside for how that action, had it been permitted, would have been able to proceed.
As I understand it, the decision not to accept the appeal by the Tupuna Manga Authority by the Supreme Court simply means that the requirements regarding consultation are therefore left in place, and there will be a requirement for the authority to consult. The budget that we set is an overall budget, and the decision is made within that, and as per what is set out in the budget for the Tupuna Manga Authority to expend that money as they determine. So the only change that is made, to the best of my knowledge, is regarding the provision around consultation. And you'll recall, of course, that Auckland Council did not seek to appeal to the Supreme Court on the requirements on it. So that's the only change, and it doesn't alter the nature of what we have included in the budget. Tamsin, I don't know whether you want to make any comment on that.
No, I was through you, Chair. I was just going to suggest that also that perhaps this is a question for my legal colleagues in terms of what we're actually asking you to make a decision on here. As I understand it, the operational plan has already been agreed to, and this is just adopting the budget documentation. So I think any questions relating to the tupuna to its actual operational budget and the details of that would need to be directed to the Tupuna Authority.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So the way that I'm going to interpret it is, as it's been explained to me, and I do appreciate today is very much signing off those decisions that were really foreshadowed last month. So I don't want to delay proceedings unduly, but it's going to be, in terms of accountability, the funds that had been allocated for the operational plan, from our perspective, it's going to be cost neutral. There is no impact on that decision. And it would just be useful to know whether those legal costs would have been met within their wider operational fund, or whether that would have been additional work that council would have been through our legal team, what cost implications there might have been for council, even though council chose not to appeal.
The council chose not to appeal, that's quite correct, and council did not vote any additional funding to the Tupuna Maunga Authority in order for it to appeal, so they would have taken that out of their existing funds.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm being a bit tedious. I would like at some stage to know, there were some comments, just some observations I have that might pertain to a number of the agenda items, and I wonder at what point you might welcome the opportunity for those of us who wish to speak on the budget to be able to do so. We can do it under this agenda item or others. I'll be guided by you, sir.
I think probably under item 10, because it sets out specifically what the line items are in terms of voting for the rates. This is the overall approval of the budget, and obviously we need to approve the budget in order to ensure supply. So item number 10, Councillor, might be the best opportunity for you to raise those questions.
I'll signal then that I would like to make some comments at that point that may relate also to the budget, but if you're going to permit me to make those at item 10, that's fine with me.
Every councillor understanding orders has the right to question and comment on items of the budget, notwithstanding the fact that this is the final stage in the confirmation process, which generally doesn't involve extended debate. Further question from Councillor Walker.
So I think it's been answered, and if my understanding from your reply just now is that the appropriate part of the budget for a councillor like myself to raise issues around the amount of the budget itself is in 10. That's correct?
Yep, if you wish, Councillor.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to put the vote, but there has been a request for a division, so I will ask Sandra to take the vote.
Your Worship, I did ask for a comment.
I'm sorry, Councillor Newman, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Councillor Newman, before we do the vote.
Yeah, look, thank you, Your Worship. I don't intend to speak to all matters today, but I did want to make and place on record, if I may, that my vote on the budget today shouldn't reflect my, shouldn't be interpreted as my endorsement of a number of parts central to that budget. Your Worship, my vote today reflects the fact that I don't want to block supply, because parks still need to be mowed and the animal management officers still need to catch stray dogs that are running around my ward. Your Worship, the political debate on this budget took place a month ago, and I stand by my vote on that, including my strong opposition to the introduction of climate action targeted rate. And I continue to oppose the introduction of new targeted rates for activities at a time when the capital works budget is being cut. Your Worship, you know, I have made it, I've said before that changes in terms of capex is going to, it does hurt to deny transport improvements in Karaka. It hurts to deny the Papakura Local Board the means to connect Opeki Sports Park to town supply, so as to ensure reliable irrigation and sanitation. And I have to say to you, Your Worship, that as a trustee of the Wiri Licensing Trust, I am pushing the officers for transparency related to facility renewals, and I'm very unhappy with what I'm being told. And it is difficult for me to accept the maxim that the problem gamblers of South Auckland are having to step in and help out at a time when this council's priority is to fund the acquisition of electric ferries for Waitemata Harbour. Your Worship, you are entitled to know what I would have done differently. Well, it needs to be a matter of record that I would have preferred in previous years a different rate path, which, if adopted, would have meant a more sustainable program for renewals. I would have wanted to have seen a bigger growth capex program so as to ensure that we could properly charge development contributions through adjustments to the household unit equivalent contribution that developers pay to fund the growth capex in partnership with the council. I stand by my desire to have a consultation on the proposition of partial divestment of shares in Auckland International Airport. My constituents need to know that I would have liked a partial divestment. I wouldn't have wanted to see the introduction of the climate rate this year. Your Worship, you will be aware that I have previously supported the climate action component of the general rate increase, but my opposition this year has been largely premised on the timing and the design of the rate, which comes in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis in a generation. I make those comments, Your Worship, in this debate because it needs to be a matter of record. But of course, the budget setting process hasn't really allowed for a discussion into areas that you disagree with, because of course this is your mayoral proposal, and you have been very clear about that, about what you will consider and what you won't consider. So, Your Worship, this is your last budget, and I wish you well as you move on past your time at Auckland Council. I've known you a long time, and indeed I've knocked on a lot of doors with you. I continue to knock on doors throughout my ward, and I remain very comfortable that my opposition to key components in this draft budget reflects how my constituents feel. But we do need to ensure supply, so that will be the reason for my vote today.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Comment, Councillor Walker.
So my comment is very much along the same lines as Councillor Newman, and I endorse almost without exception all of the points that he has made. In addition, though, I would note that I am opposed to the expenditure on the part of the Te Puna Mangaro Authority for the removal of trees. I note that in their accounts that shows as a capital item, which I think from an accounting perspective is fundamentally wrong. It should be operational. While I support the climate change rate, I do not believe that the path that we are going down is as fast, as economical, and it is as substantial as it needs to be, certainly by comparison with many other cities. And I've raised a number of constructive suggestions around those things that I would advocate for in terms of bringing emissions down much more quickly. I have an ongoing concern within the transport budget around the design and installation of cycleways that are fundamentally unsafe and, from what I see, do not meet international best practice in terms of design. They're downright dangerous. Similarly, within the Auckland transport budget and across the budgets for water care and many parts of council, I think that we spend an enormous amount of money on highly disruptive roadworks and the like that are at huge cost to council and very disruptive to the community. I agree with the comments that Councillor Newman made around development contributions. And lastly, I wish to have my vote noted against the loss of pay-as-you-throw for the local boards north of the bridge, the lack of incentivisation for reducing waste, and the lack of incentivisation for those people that want to process food waste at home themselves, far more economically than the cost that they would otherwise pay to the council. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that this is your budget and your last budget. Obviously, I'm at odds with some of it yet again, but I will vote to make sure that it goes through for supply reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Desley-Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm only speaking because I note a division has been called, and I just want to say that the Local Government Act requires us to adopt a budget before the 1st of July. If we don't adopt a budget, we are in breach of our legal requirements. I appreciate not everyone agrees with everything, but this is where we have to adopt a budget. And I just thought I'd make that point very, very clear for everybody. If we do not adopt a budget, and what it is actually this budget, we are in breach of our legal requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate what Councillor Simpson has said. I remember a couple of terms ago when we had several councillors, it was a very close vote, and one of the councillors was so lacking in understanding of the need to actually adopt a budget that we would actually be ultra vires, would be out of illegally operating, that they questioned the Auditor General, who was sitting over here, and said to her, "Are you sure?" And she said, "I'm the Auditor General, yes." And so I think that is the issue here. We've got to keep the city going. We've got to pay the bills. We've got to pay for all our contracts. And of course, no one will ever agree with everything. And you have have groups of people. I mean, there's been 11 of us, and I don't know why I'm included in this bunch, who've been receiving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 by now, emails saying don't support the climate action targeted rate and get back to basics. Well, as far as I'm concerned, providing public transport is a unitary council's basic function. And so, and planting trees, which is what the Qatar will pay for. So for me, this is absolutely paying for the basics. So I will support it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you to all councillors who have made comments in respect to the climate action targeted rate. Obviously, we did go out. We had extensive consultation. Well over 2/3 of those that made submissions to us asked for it. And equally, when we did an objective independent survey across a cross-section of Aucklanders, there was a very, very clear margin for that rate. But in any issue, there's never going to be unanimity. But, you know, I'm very happy to accept that the people that are supporting that targeted rate outnumbered those opposing it by more than 2 to 1. There's never a good time to bring it in, and for reasons of cost pressures at the moment, this year isn't an ideal time. But we've been told by experts within New Zealand and across the board, and governments right around the world have agreed, this is not something that can be delayed. If we delay acting on climate change now, the impact will be much worse and the costs will be much greater. And I, for one, don't want to leave a legacy for my children and grandchildren of a world that is changed almost unrecognisably by the severe impact of global warming, rising sea levels, severe weather events. We need to act. We voted unanimously that it was an emergency. If you've got an emergency, you don't delay it till an appropriate time sometime in the future. You act, and you act now, and that's what we're doing. Councillor Fletcher, you have a comment.
Oh, thank you. I might as well make my comments now rather than under agenda item 10, as you had suggested. In what I want to say, you know, there are benefits and disbenefits. There is frustration by me in the construct of the budget because as somebody who has followed government and local government for a number of years, there isn't clarity for me in terms of where the accountability falls on whose budget it is. Technically, legally, if we're all going to talk about legal things, it was your proposal. And I think Councillor Newman has spoken most eloquently about the frustrations that he's got. Consistently over the last 10 years, I have wanted to see more debate within the opportunities we had leveraging off the council balance sheet. But where it is the mayoral proposal, a lot of those sorts of discussions are ruled out of order. I also have a concern that increasingly we have many hours of workshops, and I think there was some sarcasm levelled last month about, oh my goodness, you know, you had 50 hours of workshop, if you don't like it, you know, why didn't you raise it there? Well, a lot of these things were ruled out because they weren't part of the proposal that you wanted to put forward. And I think the other concern I've got with the way that workshops progress here, and it's something that I have talked about with Phil Wilson, is are they workshops or are they university-type lectures? Because we can have an awful lot of information, and that is in no way disrespect to staff. We have fantastic staff giving wonderful information, but it is to reinforce the position of the mayoral budget. So in terms of that contestability, it is quite frustrating at times to be able to see those opportunities that might be circuit breakers or game changers. Now, having said that, I detect that there is some real opportunity looking into the future for some further consideration around the port and getting perhaps a little more commercial investment into the port. And I don't want to go too far in saying that because I wouldn't want to jinx it. But that is something that, for me, I really, really welcome. But right now, the cost of living crisis is one that we're grappling with within council, with supply chain issues, with, you know, COVID-related, then fare boxes and you name it. But generally, it's acknowledged that the outlook is really pessimistic and it's having a detrimental effect on a lot of individual household. Interest rates, costs of fuel, increase in utilities. I don't know about you, but whether it's Spark or Genesis or whomever I'm using, all of those costs are going up. And have we given sufficient consideration to the burden on the households? Now, that's something we will consider in agenda item 10, so I don't want to progress that too much further. I've also received some implied criticism for my concern that the better off funding that we are taking with regards the three waters, it is of concern to me. I think we have compromised our ability to negotiate moving forward. That's a personal view. I'm entitled to a personal view. I think in a negotiating situation, I mean, any money that the government is prepared to give us is obviously very welcome. But did that skew the way that we might have looked at the budget in terms of those things that might be really hard decisions going forward? I know this is just an annual budget, it's not an LTP, and it's going to be really hard on an incoming council. There's some huge issues for which that council is going to have to address. I've already canvassed with you, sir, my concern that even within the budget that we have no dedicated funding for regional parks and acquisitions or partnership funding with major institutions. I know that you'll come back and say, well, there's $841 million in the LTP for parks, but by and large, that is more just responding to the infrastructure that's associated with growth. One of the things I feel really passionately about is that we can actually see greater opportunities in regional parks moving forward, because they are one of those things that most of the public seem to enjoy most. Progress is long and slow. I welcome the governance changes and delegations that we are conferring on local boards. It's going to allow for much better cohesion in terms of decision making around community assets, and I think the regional cluster groups that are going to merge are going to perhaps set a framework for further reform moving forward. It's a shame that we didn't do that when we had the opportunity of doing a governance review a few years ago, but I see that as really welcome, and that will have a positive impact looking forward at the types of facilities that we want all Aucklanders to be able to enjoy. I'm aware that I'm going to go over time. I wish you well for the future, but I do feel that this isn't my budget. We can have had 50 hours of workshops, of material being given to us. I'd like to know the breakdown of how much of that 50 hours was actually in question time between governing body members and officers. I think it's probably rather less, but it's the best that can be achieved for this moment in time. But my final words are one that those who are going to join this council in the next term must be aware that they're going to have to take some monumentally hard decisions, and I think we've missed some opportunities here. I do think we've sold out in terms of the government and not having a stronger stand on Three Waters as we might have, and so thank you for the opportunity to make a few comments.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Al Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, thank you, one, for your mayoral proposal. And just wanted to make a point around your mayoral proposal, Your Worship, because now what we've got in front of us is Auckland Council, the governing body's annual budget, not yours. You put the mayoral proposal in there. I want to say thank you. I want to congratulate you. I want to also congratulate Councillor Simpson with all the workshops that we have had, Councillor Simpson. And as a result of the staff that we have, I am fully informed in regards to the situation that we are finding ourselves in. And as a result, I believe that this budget is one that we need to put through and we need to approve, because as Councillor Fletcher just said, we've had quite a few hours in regard to this, but I have found them to be informative. I have found them for our staff, especially around some of the pātai that not only myself but others have asked, that the response has been top notch. So thank you so much to the staff and to both you and Councillor Simpson around this. Your Worship, the interesting thing I think from my perspective is that it's the way I look at things since you've been the mayor of Auckland, and you've had it tough in regards to this with COVID and everything else. You've had it tough, but you've also taken everybody along with your mayoral proposal, and as a result, we end up passing a few annual budgets, Your Worship, but also the long-term plan. But it's still the same people that may not find everything, and as a result, will be voting against this. And that's their right. That's their right not to find things that they could say, I don't agree with. As a result, I'm going to vote against it. I will be supporting this budget. And again, Your Worship, thank you so much, because I know that your mayoral proposal was considered when you put it in front of us. We had those workshops. We decided what the end product is. We are seeing the end product. And as a result of that, I will be supporting this annual budget. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor Papacoon.
Tēnā koe e te koromatua. I'm going to try and say a few comments without coughing. If I do have a bit of a coughing fit, I'll just mute myself, but would like to be able to continue. When we had the debate on approving the budget earlier this month, I didn't speak at that session, but I really did enjoy a lot of the comments that were made around the table. And I think you set out the budget really well and the context around your mayoral proposal in the big three themes, in particular around how this is a fiscally prudent approach to the budget. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the work that you have put into this process, into the budget, and for it being your final one. With that debate that we heard earlier in the month, one of the areas I didn't think that was covered that I just wanted to mention this time was around the community engagement and how in the 12 years that I've been on council, I've really seen that being an area that has really developed and progressed in a way that we're hearing from a far greater diversity of voices. And even though the consultation took place under really difficult circumstances with the COVID restrictions, even through that process, the team were able to be really nimble, the engagement team, and ensure that we heard back and engaged with a whole diversity of our communities across Auckland in a way that was inconceivable back a decade ago, when we would just hear from established groups who were very used to dealing with council in a very formal way. So I did just want to acknowledge that part of the process. Also that I was kind of sceptical, I have to admit, going into the engagement that we would get support for the targeted rate, especially with all the anxiety that people are experiencing around the cost of living, around COVID, about what it means for the future. But we had a really clear response on that targeted rate. We had 68% support, and a really strong support across nearly every single local board area and across ethnic groups, gender, age. We really heard back from all of the communities across Auckland, and I do think we have to take that into account. So I do want to thank the team for that work and also the way in which we're receiving the analysis. And I just want to talk of what Councillor Alf just mentioned about the ability to participate through the workshops and the discussions. And I feel that there were multiple opportunities for councillors to put forward alternatives or to, especially to propose potential cuts that we didn't hear. Just another point I just wanted to make in finishing is just to acknowledge Chair of the Finance and Performance Committee, Councillor Simpson. Desley, if there's anybody who's really been under fire through this process, it has been you. And it's just awful to see some of the really horrible attacks that you've had to experience from people who are attacking you for supporting this, when you are just reflecting the wishes of your community and the feedback. And as you have said, you know, there's things that you don't support in this budget, but you're taking kind of an 80-20 approach to it. And there's always going to be things that we don't all 100% support. But as has been mentioned, you know, this is about the supply for council, and it's about taking it forward. So I really want to thank you and for your work, and you acknowledge your work, and that how we've gone through a real fair engagement process. We didn't experience a big misinformation campaign, which has been fantastic, and you've really taken a principled approach to your work. Excuse me, one last cough. not just a principled approach, but you have worked just tremendously hard. So I did just want to acknowledge you and the whole team that have put this together. So thank you for that opportunity to comment, Mr. Mayor. I know everybody around the table was hoping this would just be a very quick process. You're just going to be able to put it there, but I just feel that there were things that hadn't been said that I just wanted to make this comment now in terms of supporting the adoption of the budget. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor, and we're all feeling for you with that remnant of COVID that you're still suffering from, and thank you for making the effort despite having to deal with that. The next comment comes from Councillor John Watson.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I have taken on board your observations at the start that this is a formality we're going through here. The debate has been had twice, and myself, like others, have made our opposition to various parts of the budget crystal clear. So I won't, in the interest of time, revisit those arguments that were put up. But I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments that I think are appropriate. We have heard a lot about the 50 workshops and the ability to put forward contrary views. I would just simply make the point that very early on in the term of this council, there were 6 councillors who actually wrote a formal letter to the then CEO requesting more information, specific cost and revenue centres, and as a consequence of that letter, which was made in a genuine sense, particularly at that time when the onset of COVID was particularly stark, and we were politely but firmly told that to keep a governance perspective, and that information wasn't forthcoming. So I appreciate that there is a lot of work done, but in terms of contestable advice and the ability to drill down on detail, that has been tried, and the response wasn't forthcoming at that time. And as I said, I have that letter of communication if anyone wants to actually see what happened at that time. As far as this budget goes today, certainly by this stage in proceedings, the council's options are becoming increasingly limited, and I guess if there's any objection I've had when I've spoken is the willingness to overlook the years that have preceded 2022, in which a number of decisions have been made at various points that have contributed in large part to our lack of options now and our rather parlous financial position. I think there was a comment made about the Bourbons in the last council meeting, how they learnt nothing and forgot nothing, and unfortunately I think there's a tendency in our council to conveniently overlook the past, and like all historians will tell you, if you forget the lessons of the past, then you're condemned to relive them, and unfortunately that's been a pattern that has unfolded on a number of fronts. Finally, I just make the comment, Mr. Mayor, as much as this is the council putting out the budget, in terms of the community that then live by the consequences of this budget, there is increasing need, there is increasing difficulty in meeting costs that are compounded by the general cost of living increase. We now have essentially 4 targeted rates in some parts of Auckland who are still halfway through their adjustment to the urban rating proposal, which in the last budget imposed 15 to 28%. There's a cumulative effect taking part there, and when added on to the regional fuel costs, which really don't receive much in the way of comment now at all, there is a significant financial imposition on ratepayers, and the ability to pay those rates are increasingly coming to play. So I'd just say that going forward, this council is going to have to make some tough decisions. It is going to have to take contestable advice, and the options in terms of increasing rates, service cuts, and increased asset sales can only go so far. But for all that, as I said, this isn't the day to revisit the arguments that have been put up in the past, and it's a formal process, and as a consequence, I'll be supporting the budget going forward for supply. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills.
Kia ora, Mayor, and just want to acknowledge you, Councillor Simpson, and especially all the staff that have put this together. I know it's been complicated and difficult for years.
Councillor, your mic tends, excuse me, Councillor, your mic tends to come in and out and to fade, so I'm not sure whether you can do something about that, but if you can...
It's because I've only got one earpiece in and the microphone's on that earpiece.
Okay, right, that sounds better. Please continue, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fair enough, that was my fault. Is that better?
That's a whole lot better.
Cool, I was swinging you all around. Just want to acknowledge as the last budget where you're the lead and the mayoral proposal, obviously that is the legal way that we do things at Auckland Council. But I have felt that we have all been on the waka, invited on the waka, been able to participate in the whole 6 years. And it is good that we have opposition to certain things, discussion, debate. But as I remember before, you were around the last couple of years of the last term before you were mayor. You know, the 10-year budget passed by one vote. There was lots of very close votes, the division, but there has been good support from, I think, all 21 local boards supported the 10-year budget. And I think the 10-year budget passed 17 votes to 4 or something. Like there has been, I think, as much as possible that you've brought us on along the way. Yes, there's been hard decisions, big decisions like the water quality targeted rate, natural environment targeted rate, but actually that is because we've underfunded things in this city for decades and we're finally getting on top of it. I think of ATAP in 2016 was a $20 billion ATAP. It was actually 26, but 6 billion of that was not funded. We now have a $32 billion ATAP that is fully funded, which is pretty phenomenal. I think we increased water infrastructure spending by about 50% in the last 2 or 3 years, and significant. We're seeing the renewals, even with COVID, the renewals in our community and across Auckland are really have been ramping up over the last 3 or 4 years. So I want to acknowledge that, and that's part of this. On climate change, that I think, you know, there was lots of discussion on this, but I think in the end, the vote a couple of weeks ago was I think 19 of us or 20 of us supported at least parts of the climate action targeted rate. And as Councillor Cooper says, this is not anything out of the ordinary. This is bread and butter that we're trying to fund. This is public transport, walking, cycling, planting trees, the ferries, basically the focus that any council should be doing, but we haven't always had the budget to do it. I haven't heard, and you've asked a number of times for other solutions to rapidly reduce emissions, but our experts, Matthew Blakey has said a number of times that this is the best package under Auckland's control to reduce emissions rapidly within our control, on top of all the other things that we put in the 10-year budget last year. You know, and it's significant, and that's leadership, and we've unanimously supported the direction. Te Tātaki Tāwhiri was our direction. 21 local boards, all of us sat around and supported that, and the climate action targeted rate and other initiatives have come out of that direction. It is significant. There is a lot of things to do for the next council. There are some really tough decisions. You know, Jim has brought that long list of cost centres and different things that we need to make decisions on. I think it was a list of a couple hundred items across the council that we need to look at if we're doing right, if we can do them better, if we should be doing them at all. And we've started making those decisions already. So I want to acknowledge the team for coming up with that. Yeah, just want to say this is not easy for our communities, but we've kept, I think, what many of us, all of us have a part to play and have had a part to play in this, whether it's ensuring our libraries don't have reduced hours, whether it's ensuring that our sports fields keep getting replaced, whether our footpaths keep getting replaced, that everything that we are doing as a city is moving forward. the tracks, the Cody tracks, the things in our regional parks. There is significant new funding that there wasn't there 3 or 4 years ago that we're adding in this budget. More support to local boards having decision making. There are tough things happening, but if you look around, even the bigger regional projects like the zoo, there's significant investment in there. The Auckland Museum, that's our funding too from Aucklanders. I think Aucklanders would say that yes, this is a tough time, but they keep telling us they want action on these things. They want the spending in the right areas. They want the upgraded streets. They want public transport. They want climate action, and they want the water quality and natural environment improvements that are in this budget as well. And on the Maunga Authority, we don't go into the details of their operational spending, but I will say what has happened in our local community with Mangawika and Takarunga, the investment that Te Puna Maunga Authority have put into those maunga has been significant, and the change. And we had almost 3,000 people at Takarunga on Saturday night for Matariki, and the Te Puna Maunga Authority supported that, and people clearly saw what was going on was positive for our city. So just want to say there's a lot of good things, a lot of tough things, but want to acknowledge everyone and acknowledge the people of Auckland for funding all of this because they expect better for our city. And I think we've tried our best to give as much of what we can of what they've asked for. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and thank you, Councillor. I don't have any other requests for speaking, and we've really had the debate that I was probably expecting on item 10, but it's good to have the debate now, and I want to thank everybody for their contributions. So with no other speakers, I'll maybe just say some things in reply, because there have been a lot of comments made. First of all, this is, of course, a mayoral proposal, but it's a mayoral proposal that is worked through collaboratively with the opportunity for every councillor through those 63 hours of committee meetings and workshops to have their say, to ask questions. I don't think we curtailed questions in any of those workshops. We took the full time. Thank Desley Simpson for a chairing of those workshops, and she was very fair to everybody. Of course, with a budget, it's natural, some people will oppose some things in the budget, but there's always an obligation that when you participate in a debate about a budget, you need to do more than oppose. You also need to propose alternatives, and I think Councillor Hills made that point. So if you don't want to do something, then what do you want to do? And I think those workshops did give people the real opportunity to put up alternative proposals if they would withstand scrutiny better than what was contained in the mayoral proposal. And I've been pretty flexible in terms of what I wanted to adopt, unlike the Bourbons who, as Councillor Watson said, learned nothing and forgot nothing. I learn something every day, and that's been one of the real privileges of being mayor of this place, working closely with people and working with a cross-section of people. I'm just looking around the table at, people that have been hugely constructive in putting together the budget. And we have different political backgrounds. That hasn't mattered a damn. We've worked together because we know that what we're here for is to do things on behalf of the city, to make it a better city. And I'm really proud of the fact that this council has operated functionally when I've just been listening to, the problems that Wellington are having, that Christchurch are having, Tauranga, the commissioners put in, Invercargill is having. This council that has faced some of the toughest challenges of any council has by and large come together and taken a constructive view and found a good way forward. And I want to thank councillors for that, and I also want to thank Jim, you and your staff for what you've done and how you've worked professionally on our behalf. I won't say anything more about climate change because I've had a chance to comment on that, but I do want to talk about the situation we're in. It is a tough situation. We all know that, when COVID rips $900 million out of your budget, that's going to have an impact. And you can't deal with that without having to find savings, without having to look at all of the instruments that are available to you to produce a prudent and responsible budget. And that's what we've produced this year, that's what we've produced over the last 5 years, and that's what Council will have to continue to produce. I want to say something about investment because I think Councillor Newman mentioned, cuts in capital investment. Actually, Councillor, and you're probably aware of this actually, the budget that we're putting forward for capital investment is actually $230 million more than the average over any of the last 5 years. Actually, we've increased our investment in infrastructure by 30%. Councillor Hills mentioned that, taking the transport budget from $20 to $31 billion, from 20 to 31 billion. Now, not everybody liked the regional fuel tax, but if you weren't going to do that, how were you going to raise the money to pay for the infrastructure that Auckland City put off time and time and time again? And that meant an infrastructure deficit as our population was growing by up to 40,000 a year. So actually we have made that infrastructure investment. We should be proud of it. Look at what we've put into water, $11 billion. So we know that climate change is presenting challenges, but we now have a reliable supply of water, 100 million litres a day, extra supply from what we had before the last drought, and that's been good. Borrowing, some people have raised the question of borrowing. Our debt is 17.5% of the value of our assets. If your home mortgage is 17.5% of the value of your property, you'll probably think you're doing pretty well out of that. Have we borrowed to excess? No, actually the credit rating agency said we're willing to give you up to 290% of your debt to revenue ratio. This year we'll be at 254%, less than our long-term goal. Have we been responsible in value for money and savings? We've just saved another 90 million this year. This budget will put another 90 million in. Councillor Simpson, in the emergency budget, or the recovery budget, we saved 120 million. 2.4 billion in savings since 2010. We are acting responsibly. Are our rates excessive? Well, ask the people of Tauranga. They're paying 13.7% in the coming year. Wellington paying 8.9%. The other metros are pretty much the same as we're paying. No, we've taken into account that people are under pressure, but we don't want to be like New York was when they went into disaster, because council after council, mayor after mayor refused to increase the revenue, and the city went bust. And things collapsed, visibly collapsed. Well, I'm not about to do that. I haven't done that as mayor, and neither of you as councillors. It's important that we make the investments where they are required. So, look, I really do commend this budget to you. As Councillor Newman said, this is about supply. So if you vote against the budget, that's fine, that's everybody's right, but you would be voting against supply, and that would mean that the council would cease to function. So that's your choice, and you're about to exercise that choice now, because I'm going to ask Sandra to take the vote by division as requested.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Mulholland requested the division. Councillors, you're voting on the item before you. Mayor Goff.
Aye. Aye. I better say it into the microphone and emphatically.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Or.
Councillor Collins.
Or.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Dalton.
For.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Abstain.
Councillor Henderson.
For.
Councillor Hills.
Aye. Thank you.
Councillor Mulholland.
Abstain.
Councillor Newman.
Yes.
Councillor Sayers.
Abstain, thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
For. Sorry, couldn't find my button.
Councillor Stewart.
Abstained.
Councillor Walker.
Abstain.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Young.
For.
That's carried 15 votes to nil with 5 abstentions.
Thank you very much, councillors. Any Minister of Finance in Wellington will be pleased to pass the budget by that margin. We come to item number 9 now, which is the adoption of